Hola amigos, ¿qué tal? Soy Cristina de Your Spanish Dreams, and in this video we're going to look at tips on how to conjugate verbs in Spanish, particularly the irregular ones. Now, learning to conjugate in Spanish is a common difficulty, particularly with the irregular verbs, and I can understand that because it's very different from English. However, there are tips on how to do this easier. And so here are my 3 tips for how to learn the verbs in Spanish, particularly the irregular ones. Number 1 is finding patterns and grouping verbs together into categories. For example, we've got the hoy verbs: voy, soy, estoy. Also the go-go verbs: tengo, vengo, salgo, hago. See? Now, when we look at patterns, things actually look a lot easier to manage. Because if we think of each verb individually, it can seem really overwhelming as there seems to be tons of them. However, when we group them into patterns, we actually see that there is some sense, that there is some rules that can be applied and predicted, and so that's going to give you the clue on how to approach your learning in a much more efficient way. My tip number 2 is break your learning down and only focus on the core irregular verbs at first. Because as I said before, when we look at verbs, it can really seem overwhelming. There's so many of them that if we don't know exactly how to approach our learning, we're going to most likely be put off by the amount of verbs. However, if we concentrate on the 8-10 irregular verbs that are mostly used, then we're going to really use our energy much more efficiently and wiser. So which are the core irregular verbs in Spanish? I'm sure you're aware of them, but just in case, let's look at them. So, ser, estar, ir, tener, hacer, salir, venir, poder, querer y saber. You can totally apply the 20-80% rule here, whereby learning the 20% irregular verbs in Spanish, you can master 80% of the communication. Now that's really efficient learning, isn't it? So focus on these verbs at first, and when you master them in different persons and different tenses, then you can move on into other irregular verbs. And my tip number 3 is put them in context and into practice as soon as possible. Because this is the best way for the brain to integrate what we're learning, when we put it into practice purposefully. And so how can you put them into practice? Well, options are endless, but you could think of some examples that are relevant to you. You can write something down. You could think of a story incorporating these verbs and be a bit creative with it. You can send a text to a Spanish friend. This is a good opportunity for you to think, how can I put these verbs into practice as soon as possible? I hope you found this video useful and see you in the next one. Hasta pronto!